Welcome to episode 48 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this show at the show notes, which is www.7, all spelled out, so SEVEN health.com/48.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey guys, and welcome to another installment of Real Health Radio. This week is another one of the shows in which it's me interviewing a guest, and this week my guest is Krista Scott-Dixon. So Krista is a former university professor who turned a hobby of farting around on the internet answering health and fitness questions into a second career. She's now the director of curriculum at Precision Nutrition. She runs the women's weight training website Stumptuous and has been doing this for 20 years. And in her spare time, she likes to do cycling, climbing, and throwing people on the floor. So I've been following Krista and also Precision Nutrition for a couple of years now, and I've been really impressed with the quality of writing that they put out. And this is both in terms of like the content and the information, which is solid, but also the level of writing and the ability to convey the message in a really easy to understand way. And this is often for topics that aren't always the easiest to understand. And as you'll hear as part of the show, one of the things that like Krista and also Precision Nutrition are very strong at is looking at habit formation. So not just thinking about increasing someone's knowledge and that this knowledge alone leads to better results, but being very constructive about how people can implement changes and do it in a way where they keep it up. And I think this is often very much missing from a lot of the information in the health and nutrition world. So a lot of the conversation revolves around being an effective coach or an effective practitioner and the skills that are needed as part of this. We also talk about Krista's own struggles with food and body image. And this is your kind of atypical story because she doesn't really fit the mold with what happened and what she went through. We also talk a bit about the body positive movement, and she sees it as having some strengths, but also some weaknesses. And so we go through that. A couple of things I just want to mention. In the interview, a couple of times she mentions JB, and JB is short for John Berardi, who is the person, one of the founders of Precision Nutrition. She also says PN a number of times, and PN is short for Precision Nutrition. So I just wanted to mention that in case you're trying to follow along and you're like, I don't understand what that acronym means. So I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and Krista is one of the most articulate guests I've had on the show. I love hearing her do interviews. This should be really helpful for practitioners, also for lay people, and I really think you're going to get a ton of value from it. Before I get started with the show, I just want to mention one bit of housekeeping. Last week on the show, I mentioned that I was opening my practice to new clients. That has gone really well. And at the time of recording this intro, I now only have 3 slots left. And this means that by the end of this week, from when this podcast is being released, possibly like at the latest early next week, I'll be all filled up. And the next time I'll then be taking on clients will be at the start of 2017, probably towards the end of January time. So I work with clients for a period of 5 months where we have a consult for an hour, and that's every 2 weeks. I have clients that I work with all over the world, and so the consults are done by Skype or FaceTime or phone if people want to do it that way. So even if you're not based in the UK, this isn't a problem, and more than half the people I work with are in the US or Canada or Australia or Germany or other places around the world or around Europe. And before working with someone, I always have a free initial chat with them, and that will last for 40 or 50 minutes. This allows me to find out about your background and what's going on with you and what you're wanting to get out of us working together. It then gives me the opportunity to explain how I work with clients and what that process looks like. And basically, it just lets us figure out if we are right for one another. Because I only want to work with people who I truly believe I can help and who understand the way that I work and are on the same page. And so this chat allows us both to determine if that is the case. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can head over to www.seven, so seven-health.com/help. And you'll get more information there, and it'll detail how I work with clients in a very general way. You can have a read through, and at the bottom of that page, there is a link to then apply for that free initial chat. If you do that, you fill in your name, your email address, I will get back to you within 48 hours, and we can then arrange a time that suits both of us for us to connect and have that chat. So if you're interested, head over to www.seven-health.com/help and get in contact. So with that out of the way, let's get started with my interview with Krista Scott-Dixon. Krista, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So to start with, I guess, why don't you just explain a bit about your background, how you got into working in the health and fitness field and then working for Precision Nutrition?
Well, I like to say that I am an escaped academic. So my previous career was as a university professor. I was at York University in Toronto, and I thought I was on the path for an academic career. And then about 5 years after finishing my PhD, I was like, this isn't really for me. And I actually just quit, just literally walked away, put my resignation letter down on the desk of HR and literally walked out of the building. And I didn't have a plan or anything to go to, but what had been happening was that I had put myself through grad school by working as a personal trainer. And so I sat down and I thought, well, maybe I could be a personal trainer. I calculated the hourly wage and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I could probably make a living out of this. And so I kind of did that for a while after I quit the university. And then I got in touch with the folks who run PN. I had known them for many years beforehand. I was like, hey, I quit my job. And they said, you know what, we're looking for someone to edit our textbook. And I thought, oh, okay, I can do that. Yeah. And then about 6 months later, they said, we're looking for someone to coach for us. And I thought, okay, I can do that. And then about 6 months later, they said, we're looking for someone to write our entire coaching program. And I said, well, I can do that too. So that's it was very organic. I've been into health and fitness since, for about 20 years. So, it was sort of this natural, very organic kind of progression for me. But it was not something I ever planned, for sure.
Okay. And so when did that all happen? How long ago?
I started with PN in 2008. So it's been 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty solid amount of time.
Yeah.
And how long had they been around before you got on board?
Well, they were around in a few different incarnations. I think in the beginning they started 2000, 2001, 2002, thereabouts. And at that time, I think they were called Science Link, and I think it was just John and Phil, the two guys that started it. And they had the idea of just making a website for JB at the time and, putting out articles and stuff like that. So in the form of Precision Nutrition, I think they had only been around for a year or 2 years before I joined them. I think I was employee number 10, maybe. Okay. And now they're up to about 65, 70 people. So that gives you a sense of the scale of it now.
Yeah. And so you also have your own blog, Sumptuous, that, if I'm correct, you started in 1996. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, it's been 20 years. It's been 20 years.
Do you still have a copy of what your old website used to look like?
I should dig it up. I think it only had about 5 pages because, no one had big websites really back then. And it was all hand-coded, right? And, I don't think I have it anymore, but I still remember what it looked like. And I was feeling pretty pleased with myself because I had a few images that I'd made on it, like a GIF or something that I'd made. I was feeling pretty cool about that. So yeah, it's hard to imagine, especially in the fitness industry, which is such a young industry, really. Most things have not been around even for a decade. So
yeah, I've been doing this I qualified in 2008 and I set up my first website in 2009. And even just looking at the difference of what you could do in 2009 versus now, like it's so easy to go on Wix or Weebly and set something up versus what it was even back then. So yeah, to go back then even further, I imagine that there was a lot that you had to do that you now don't have to do with a website.
Oh yeah, and I remember even before that when it was text based, right? So I started using in like 91, I think, was when I got on the internet. So, and back then it was all text-based. And that was actually how I got a lot of my early informal education, was because I was hanging out on what we called news groups, which were these sort of text-based forums. And at that time, sort of in the early mid-90s, the only people who were really getting on the internet were academics and just smart people who somehow had to use the internet for their job, right?
Yeah.
And so there was this very raucous group that I was part of called Misc Fitness Weights. Okay. And it was foul-mouthed and it was vulgar and it was just raunchy. But there were also these incredibly smart, educated people, like Pat Arnold was on it before anyone knew who he was. Dan Duchenne was on. Like some of the big names in like the 90s bodybuilding, powerlifting scene were on it, but no one knew who they were at that time, right? A lot of them. So it was this very kind of unregulated place where we talked about steroid biochemistry and, someone's 1,000-pound squat and stuff like that. Yeah. It's much different than it is now, for sure.
And so what was the reason for you setting up that blog? And then how did that like naturally evolve over time?
Yeah, the original reason was because like I've been kind of training on and off since the late 80s. I think I took my first weight training class in high school, so that would have been 88 or 89. But 96 was when I was in grad school and I had gained about 50, 60 pounds. And I was like, okay, I have to not be this way. And so that was when I started training much more seriously and regularly. But I didn't really know exactly what to do. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to look for information about this. But there was really nothing for women, right? There was Shape magazine, which was at the time telling women, don't ever dare lift anything more than 2 pounds. Otherwise, something terrible will happen to you. And I thought, I can't be the only woman with these kinds of questions. And so I would go to my university library and I would actually look at textbooks, right? And those had the correct information about training female athletes and this sort of thing. But I thought, okay, like I've solved this problem for myself. I bet other women have questions. And so maybe I'll put up a little thing that answers a few questions for people. And then every time, someone would look at it and they would give me a question and say, well, what about this? What about that? And I would go off and research it and come back. And so it kind of grew as like this information resource that just was based on what all of us were trying to figure out, and also as this antidote to all the stupid stuff that people were saying about women's training. It's so much better now. I mean, I think women coming to, to terms with it now, like going to CrossFit and whatever, strong is the new skinny, whatever you feel about that, that's such a vastly different headspace than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago was terrible for women.
Yeah. And were you always like a strong writer? Because when I read your blog, you've got an amazing like writing style that comes across just so well. You've got these real like quirky little links to odd things. And yeah, I just wanted to find out, is that always been you, or that's kind of evolved over time?
I think writing has always been something I've loved. I learned to read when I was 2 or 3 years old. I actually taught myself, according to my mother. So I was reading and writing at a very young age, always loved reading and writing, and was very just interested in language and that sort of thing. And so that interest in writing combined with, of course, academic training, right? Several years of graduate school and formal education in writing too. I had, a team of professors breathing down my neck about my writing skills. So, I've put in like 10 times the 10,000 hours kind of thing at this point. So it's definitely something that's always interested me. And I think it's also something that's a little bit lacking in the industry. There are some excellent writers in the industry. There are people who can communicate well and effectively. But I think the level of competency in expressing ideas is not as good as it could be, for sure. So it was something I sort of wanted to, I don't know, contribute to, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, I definitely get that impression whenever I read the precision nutrition articles, whether it's written by you or written by any of the other staff. Like they're always very long, but they're always well thought out and very succinct, and just like make a strong case as opposed to just like rambling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those articles you see are actually the product of a team of people. So what goes on behind the scenes is like there's this whole editorial team, and everything goes through me as the style editor, and so I'm always on people saying, there's got to be, the writing has to be a certain way, and it's something I care a lot about, that writing has to be clear and that it's a craft, and it doesn't just mean putting a bunch of words together, right? Like the language has to be just a certain way, and even things like, a lot of people in fitness, and really in general, but in fitness especially, because they tend to be more hands-on kinds of people, is that a lot of people struggle with reading and writing. Like a lot of people are not strong readers, they're not strong writers. And so if you are pitching to this audience, you have to really think about what if someone with limited skills is reading this, right? How can you convey a concept that is sophisticated, but in language that people understand? And then, of course, paradoxically, there's this thing where the simpler you write, the smarter you sound. It's sort of a weird, a weird paradox, right? And so I'm always insisting that we write very simply and clearly, and really be thoughtful in the words and ideas that we choose. So.
Because I think it's a skill. If you can take something very complex and make it really simple, that's an art form. Whereas if you have to keep it at that complex level, it's because you don't understand it enough to be able to break it down into those little parts that mean someone can understand it.
100%. And I think, being the victim of 100 academic conferences and academic journal writing, and I mean, I would completely agree with you. I think, especially within academia, this is a huge problem, which is that people are writing about things in ways that are unintelligible. And so I don't think they know what they're talking about. We don't know what they're talking about, and their effectiveness gets lost, right? Maybe my research is brilliant, but if I cannot communicate it to you effectively, then really what good is it, right?
Yeah.
So, mm-hmm.
And so with your blog and also the precision nutrition articles, so much of the focus is on habit formation. And I think too few people really talk about this. And so was this something you were always interested in? And like, if we were to go back to sort of earlier blog posts, was that what you were always writing about? Or if it came later, like what set that off?
I'm not really sure where the origin of this was, but I think that at Precision Nutrition, before my time, they figured out pretty early on that habits were where it was at. And I remember this article that John Berardi wrote many years ago before I started. And it was called something like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Nutrition Programs. And I think I printed that thing out. It might have been 2002, 2003, and like stuck it on my wall. And the idea of habits was so powerful. So, I don't think we're the first people to come up with it, but I think that we were among the first to really start nailing it down and thinking about what it could look like. And so it predates me, but when I rewrote the coaching program, we really tried to think about, like, what does this mean? And we have iterated over the years. Like, for example, one of our earlier habits was get a certain amount of sleep.
Yeah.
And after a while, I was like, that's not a behavior.
Yeah.
That's an outcome that you can't control. The habit is prepare to get a good night's sleep, So we've refined our concept of habits over the years, but I think it's definitely true that with every iteration of our coaching program and coaching clients, we've seen the power of behavioral change, that really behavioral change is, I don't want to say the be all and end all, because it's not, but it's such a huge part of what actually transforms things. And I think, behavior change is particularly important now in a context where there's so much information.
Yeah.
So we have tons of clients coming to us saying, oh yeah, I already know all that, or I already eat healthy. And I'm like, okay, well, why are you even here? If everything is perfect in your world, why are you here? And of course, the issue is that information almost never translates to action. And action is the only thing that really truly makes change for people. So I think we're like reminded about it constantly. And so we've built up our skills and our appreciation for it. But it was definitely, it's been there for at least 15 years. I'm not sure where John got it from, but wherever it was a good place.
No, definitely. And look, it's a lot of what I work on with people, because there's a difference between someone knowing something and someone actually doing it. And that's where I think too often people really get lost. And also for a lot of people, there's this concept of like, I want to be like over there. And to think about getting over there is just so overwhelming. And I'm so far from that. And I don't do any of the things that I would like to do. But at least if you can then focus on the behavioral thing, it's like, let's just focus on today or this week or this month. And then like within a year's time, someone's like, wow, I would never have imagined I would able to be at this place. But it's really come from just those simple things that I've just done again and again and again.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, the way that people feel at the end of the process. And the other thing that's sort of implied in what you're saying is you become a different person through action, right? And so it's not just the outcome of the action, which is good, but you also, in that mini daily process of setting an intention, figuring out the problem of how to get through this action, dealing with obstacles that come up. In that process, in that little daily ritual process, you become a different person. And so at the end of a year, you've had 365 days of being the kind of person who sets an intention and executes an action. And that fundamentally changes how you feel about yourself. And then there's this other piece where you can, this is how little kids learn. They're very experiential. They test things. They see, what happens if I poke my little sister with a stick? What happens if I throw this ball at the dog or whatever, right? And experience is the absolute best teacher, right? And so, for example, when we ask people to eat slowly, they can get it conceptually, but it's so hard to do. And it's really an incredible learning experience to actually have to figure out how to do this. And so it transmits information and learning in a way that just saying stuff can't ever do.
And I think there's then also the ripple effect of, I've done this, so I now know I can do that or this.
Yes.
Or I've showed up for this, and so that means that I'm the kind of person who shows up. And so that then has an impact on, well, it's not about the gym or it's not about my food. It's also now about my work, or, you know what, I need to now figure out how I can do this in my relationship or whatever. And so I do think that just multiplies out.
Yeah, that's such an important point, that cascading effect, and I think so often people who come to a nutrition program or a fitness program are so preoccupied with all the ways in which they've quote unquote failed. Right. And really, what I tell them, it's like airplane turbulence, right? You always feel the down, but you don't feel the up. And so what you can turn people's attention to with habits is these little like success, these little scaffolds and little steps of success. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And it often needs reminding, because it's that, as people move up, they forget where they were. And so I often, I'll keep food logs with people, or I'll have people do different exercises. And then it's like, we'll go back to that stuff, because inevitably there'll be times you're like, oh, this isn't working. And I'm like, let's have a look if this isn't working. Because now you're sleeping through the night. Now you've got your cycle. Now you're not getting headaches. I know it feels like things are the same, but they are clearly not how they were before.
Yeah, and I think you really put your finger on the role of a coach, right? The coach's job is to kind of be that person who can hold up the mirror to the client and say, actually, it feels like this, but in reality, it's that, right? And so the coach can kind of offer the data and the evidence and that kind of caring and informed observer voice that says, remember when you were here, now you're over there. And it doesn't feel like this because you see yourself every single day.
Yeah.
But,
So, I mean, you mentioned about a coach there and what a coach's role is, and I'd like to hear you chat more about that. And the reason I ask is I know a lot of that is your role with Precision Nutrition in terms of the level 2 and guiding people. And the other reason is a lot of people who find themselves working in the health and fitness industry, they've got there almost for personal reasons. So they had some problems with their health, so they studied nutrition and now they teach people nutrition, or they work with people as a nutritionist, or they were an athlete at school or at college, then they started doing some PT so that they would learn stuff themselves, and now they start doing it with other people. And there's a difference between having the knowledge around that stuff and then being able to coach someone. Like, that's a totally different skill set. So I'd like to just hear like some of your thoughts on this side of things.
Okay, so I think there's another piece of your question that I would get to before I would talk about coaching, which is that people often go into fitness and nutrition to fix their own problems.
Yeah.
So I started out because I was 50 pounds overweight. Other people say I learned rehab to fix my back, to fix my knee. So often we start off fixing our own problems, and that's why we get into the industry. But often being in the industry also creates its own problems, right? So. Yeah. People with an athletic background, for example, may be dealing with perfectionism, high standards, a workaholic kind of work ethic, a sense of not being good enough, right? So, and sometimes it's like, if you don't know what you don't know, you're going along perfectly fine. And then the more you learn and know, all of a sudden, like maybe you were walking around as a woman at 28% body fat, and that felt perfectly fine. You were doing whatever you needed to do. Yeah. And then you got into fitness and you realized, oh, the expectation here is that I should be, 18% body fat. And all of a sudden you're thinking, oh dear, I'm inadequate because I'm not this thing over here. Like the goalposts have moved, right? Yeah. So what tends to happen sometimes is that coaches accumulate their own stuff. And so they come into the field with knowledge, generally a desire to help people, which is good, and at the same time their own stuff. So what really needs to happen, because this can be kind of a toxic brew, what really needs to happen is not only do they need coaching skills, they also need the skills of self-awareness and self-regulation. Yeah. Because the second you get into an interaction with a client, a lot of that stuff will be triggered and evoked for you. Whether it's as simple as, I just want to help this person really, really badly, or this person's issues with food are making me think about my own issues with food, or this, person's issues with high standards are making me think about my own issues with high standards. So there's like this, there's a trifecta of coaching skills that people really need. So obviously you need the expertise of whatever is in your field, right? So exercise physiology or nutrition science. You need the coaching skills, so the ability to help people make changes and to guide them along a path. And then you also need this third piece of self-awareness and self-regulation, what coaching even is and involves. But if we were to hone in on coaching skills, there's a whole roster of these as well. And so it can be everything from helping people clarify what it is they want to need, because often they might come to you and not know what they want to need, or they think they want something, but they don't really, or they're not willing to trade off. So helping people clarify what is really important to them, where they really want to go, why they want to do this, and kind of like what they're willing to trade off in the process. Then there are things like helping people understand what to do when they get stuck, helping to problem solve, helping to anticipate, strategize, work through obstacles, helping people monitor, helping people understand what progress looks like, helping them do what we call operationalizing. So taking like a vague concept or idea, like I want to feel better, and distilling it into like measurable indicators that you can track and observe. Yeah. And of course there's the day-to-day business skills too, right? Like how to run a business, how to be pragmatic, how to act professionally. So in the level 2 coaching program, we do this year-long progression of teaching coaching skills. So we start out with teaching people, first of all, the real basic stuff, which is just to learn how to listen to people. And that's actually surprisingly difficult. It's one of those things that I think a lot of people think they do well, but when they look at it, when they time themselves, how long they can just listen to someone without blurting out something or interrupting, it's actually much less than they think. So we start with the very basics of what it means to be client-centered and active listening, which is, I think, a huge part of coaching that really goes unacknowledged. How to create rapport with your client, how to create a kind of empathic connection, and so forth. And I think a lot of the old school coaches kind of think this is a little bit wishy-washy, right? Like, it's not my job to listen to people. My job is to push them and motivate them. But unless you have that connection with them, unless you can really understand what they want, you actually don't have much. You really don't. So we start with that, and then we move into things like really understanding what clients are looking for. So helping them clarify their goals, helping them clarify what trade-offs they're willing to make in the service of those goals, which I think is very important to understand. What are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do right now? How ready, willing, and able are you to do this? Because if you have a client who's not ready, willing, and able, you have nothing. It doesn't matter if you're the best coach in the world. And then we move into things like how to set goals effectively, how to divide goals into smaller behaviors, and then how to make habits out of those, how to track those, how to track progress, how to track multiple progress indicators, how to understand particular populations, even stuff like how to understand people's cultural context, or like where their heads are at. What are they coming from? What's the physical environment of your gym? How are you acting as part of a business? So there's this wide range of skills just for coaching that go beyond your expertise in fitness and nutrition.
Yeah, and I do think that a lot of that is then missing in whatever training course someone has. And look, I haven't done anything formal on all of the stuff that you've talked about there, but I've read a ton, and I've been very conscious of, like, I need to get better at these different skills. And so it's not that I just need to read more and more research on nutrition or whatever. It's like, okay, how can I be better serving someone? How can I be, as you say, like a better listener, or how can I explain things in a better way? And I mean, one of the things you said that really stuck out from me is just getting people to understand the reality of a situation. And I think too often people are like, well, I want this. I'm like, yeah, but look at what you're doing, like what you want and then the effort that you're putting in, like those two things don't match up. And there needs to be a reality of like what people have to forego to then get to a certain level. And I think that is often missing, because unless that other person really knows that reality, they get stuck in that almost that childlike state of like, but why isn't it happening? Like, why can't I have this?
And it's interesting you use the term childlike, because this is genuinely what sometimes happens, is that people may be competent adults in a whole variety of domains of their life, but when it comes to certain areas, especially when they get provoked into stress or anxiety, you actually do hear the child brain or the teenager brain speaking.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a revelation to understand that in particular areas, people may be developmentally not adults. And that makes so much sense sometimes. When you see someone having a toddler tantrum because, I don't know, they can't eat beans or I don't know, whatever, right? Like when they flip out about that, and you understand, oh, this is the child brain speaking, it really helps you have compassion and also to understand that, okay, what do we do when a child has a tantrum? Okay, we provide structure and we provide love and compassion and caring limits, and, we be the wise parent. And I think a lot of coaches are very puzzled when they see their clients exhibiting what seems like strange behavior, they expect their clients to always be logical adults. And I think, we all try to be, but sometimes something just hits our buttons and we revert back to that 6-year-old stomping our feet because, mom wouldn't give us a candy bar kind of thing. So it's interesting that you use that term. And I think it's actually very well placed. And I think it also helps coaches be a little bit more potentially compassionate, because people are dealing with so much right now. Like, to live life in 2016 is incredibly difficult from a kind of evolutionary standpoint of what we were equipped to deal with, right? There's so much stuff coming at us, and people are increasingly isolated and alienated and overburdened with demands and just kind of generally overstimulated and over anxious. So, when we pile additional demands on top of that, or if we are harsh in our expectations, of course people freak out, right? Yeah. Like if someone said, someone's telling me the other day, well, you shouldn't eat fast food. Fast food is poison. And I'm like, I'm just not going to tell a client that because they're just trying to hold their life together right now. They don't need to hear that the solution that they thought was a quick and easy solution to finding lunch is poisonous. Like, we just don't need to kind of use that language. So I think the more compassionate we can be, the better. And to sort of say to people, look, how can we help you manage all of the stuff that you've got going on right now? And also at the same time, perhaps make some positive changes in your life. And I think that's sort of a different tone than, you're weak and you're stupid and you don't get it and you should work harder and no excuses and blah, blah, blah. Like, that just shuts people down completely. So,
and I think it's having a real understanding of context of, okay, let's look at the context in which someone is living and everything that's going on, and like, how do we make that better? And their better may be way below what you think is great, but you're like, for that person, that is a real improvement, and people need to like check their own expectations at the door and be like, how can I help that individual, even if it feels slightly meaningless to me, because for that individual, that could be a really big change.
That's such an important point, and I feel like everyone needs to have that one like emblazoned on a on a banner above their coaching door, right? Meeting people where they're at, and what maybe is not meaningful to you can be hugely meaningful to them. I think of so many of our clients that start out really just unable to do even the most basic of movements, right? And so for them, it's a huge victory when they can go up and down the stairs, or when they can do housework or pick up their kids or whatever. I mean, that's their world. And I think the more that we can get out of our own headspace and get into theirs, the better. Because, unless you do work with elite athletes, which is a whole different kind of can of worms, right? That's a whole different set of experiences. But by and large, I think most people work with regular folks, and, each person has a unique set of concerns and questions and anxieties and needs about their lives. And the more we can put ourselves, as you say, into their life world, the better, and celebrate those little triumphs along with them. Like, it's funny how many of our little triumphs feel so significant, but they're kind of dumb, right? Like when I was grappling with overeating, one of my most triumphant moments was the first Saturday night that I didn't epically overeat. Like, it's so dumb. Like, it's so silly when you say it. But to me, like, at that time, it was such a huge thing. And so, as a coach, it's kind of nice to have that bar set so low in a way, right? Because there's so many options now for celebrating. Yeah,
definitely. And you've just kind of touched on, in terms of your overeating, I know I've heard you talk previously about your own struggles with like a disordered eating, and how this was very different to the way that it happens for most people. So, I mean, do you want to tell that story of your experience?
Yeah, sure. And I think this is, my story is really a perfect example of the idea that more is not always better. So like the deeper you go into the world of fitness and nutrition, the more emphasis on that in your life is not always better. I sort of feel like there's a threshold for most people of fitness and nutrition where you just want to, have enough exercise and enough nutrition knowledge and enough consistency with all those things to just be happy and normal and sane. Yeah. And then once you attempt to push past that, especially if that's combined with a really unrelenting self-critic or very high standards, it just goes not to a good place. And so that's what happened to me. And in my case was that fitness moved from being a hobby or a thing that I did to make money on the side or whatever, to being my primary business. And I was not an athlete, and I was, in fact, the kid picked last for every team kind of thing, and, avoided gym class my whole life. And so I was suddenly dropped into this world of people who were very high achieving former athletes or, competed at higher levels in physique or whatever. And this is not my world. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just, work on myself and get better at this. And so that kind of progressed until, went to this really weird place where I was sort of super deep in this obsession with being super fit, super lean, superstar, right?
Yeah.
And at the time I thought there was something wrong with me. But of course, I've since come to learn that this is a very common experience for a lot of people who get into the fitness and nutrition industry. So, so there was a point where, I was kind of training super hard and I was cutting weight for grappling and I was doing intermittent fasting, which is just a fancy way of saying starving yourself as far as I'm concerned most of the time.
Yeah.
And I was female, obviously. So that was putting things out of whack and my body was responding very ferociously and saying, no, you're not going to starve yourself. You're going to try, but I'm not going to let you. And so I was alternating these periods of drastic weight cutting, extreme training stress with these epic out of control binges as my body was just like, please, let's get some homeostasis happening here. So, for a period of a couple of years, I thought I was just losing my mind. Like it was just cuckoo town.
Yeah.
But, in a way, I'm actually very glad I had those experiences because it did show me, first of all, the power of physiology, that, your body will protect homeostasis fiercely and aggressively, and it will do things to your brain that you didn't know that it could. But also, of course, as I said, it really helps me understand our clients. And I do think that many of our clients have some degree of disordered eating. And I find that as like just eating out of sync with what your body really needs. Like that's, and feeling some kind of level of distress around it. And I think by that definition, a lot of people have disordered eating. So it gave me a lot of insight. And it also made me realize that a lot of the information and protocols aimed at men do not work for women. Women's bodies are much more aggressive in terms of defending energy balance. And so, a young guy, maybe intermittent fasting, like he doesn't even call it that. It's just something he does, right? He doesn't even think about it. Yeah. And it's no big deal. His body is perfectly fine with it. But for a female, for a woman, and I was in my 30s at the time, for a woman, the effect may be completely different. Her body may say, no way, we are not doing this. So I think that's a key point, just the male-female differences. They do exist. They are significant. And especially when it comes to energy balance, definitely matters.
Yeah. And so how long did it take you to get through all of that? And did you, were you then just dealing with it on your own, or did you go and seek help?
Yeah, for a while I was dealing with it on my own because I didn't even really know what it was. Because I hadn't, I did not fit the dictionary definition of someone with disordered eating, right? I was older. Like I said, I was in my mid-30s at the time. I'd never really had issues with it in the past. And so it was quite puzzling to me. And it wasn't really until I was talking to some of the other fighters at my gym who were telling me about the crazy stuff that they would do after weight cutting that it started to dawn on me that maybe this was a thing, maybe this was a physiological thing.
Yeah.
That was a phenomenon, right? Because it was happening to guys, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? Maybe this has to do with weight cutting and stress. So that kind of tipped me off, and then I started reading the literature about disordered eating, and the more that I read, the more that I recognized myself, and I tried to fix myself on my own, but I think with that kind of thing, it's very, very hard to do on your own because it's so tied into the rest of your life. You pull on one string and a whole bunch of other stuff unravels, right?
Yeah.
So eventually around 2011, I think 2012, I sort of lose track of time. I went and saw someone and said, this is happening to me and this is really weird and I don't know how to make sense of it. And so I started getting help with it, and that was a revelation. And I learned a lot too. Every time I go see a counselor, I'm sort of half getting counseling and half stealing what they're doing.
Taking notes about their skill sets.
That's right. I'm like, ooh, I can use it. That's a good one. So yeah, I was getting counseling training myself too, because I wanted to embed some counseling knowledge into our coaching program. So I was getting trained as myself, to be a counselor. And then I was getting counseling from someone else. And, so it was the conjunction of all these factors. The more I learned, the more sense it started to make. And then, with that assistance, I was able to turn things around. But it did, I don't know, it took a lot of headspace shifting. And even now, like, I think I still feel occasional echoes of it. Right. Went to see, I had my own nutrition coach because I firmly believe that we should all have our own coaches, because we just can't be trusted to do our own stuff. If we make our own workout, we'll just make it out of all the things that we like to do, and it'll be totally unbalanced. So even recently I went to my own nutrition coach, and he said, you need to eat more protein. And I was like, don't tell me to eat more. Like it gave me this kind of instinctive reaction. So I think, there's still echoes of it, but it's definitely been significantly resolved, and in coaching people through it, of course, we help ourselves, right? But this is why I say that coaches need to have a lot of self-awareness, because if I'm not checking my own stuff and I'm in a session with a client who's dealing with this, I will very likely, have stuff come up for me that I may not know how to deal with.
Yeah. And one of the things that you covered there in a roundabout way, which I've thought about for quite a while, is there's a real difference in my mind between researchers and practitioners. And obviously I'm generalizing this, but when I hear or read a lot of what I see coming from researchers, they have this almost like real conviction in what they talk about as like things being a very distinct certain way. And when I speak to someone or read someone who's a practitioner, there's a lot more like leeway and much more, well, like it depends, because they have just more of that real world experience and dealing with real life human beings that don't so neatly match up with what some study would indicate. And so I think this is like one of the real strengths around like with you and also like precision nutrition is there's the real sense of like people doing this in the trenches in the real world, as opposed to just we've done all this research and this is what the research shows.
That's such an astute point too. And it's really, really key. And I mean, I remember when I started looking at the disordered eating literature, there was this category called eating disorder not otherwise specified.
Yeah.
EDNOS is the acronym.
Yeah.
And it was something like 75% of disordered eating cases fell into this bucket. And I remember reading this and thinking, you guys need to really figure this out, because, if your classification system can only handle 25% of people, it's not a very good classification system. And, what we encountered in our clients was completely missing from the literature. It's a little bit better now than it was, but there was this kind of prevailing wisdom that, only young women are restrictors, and it never happens to older women, and it never happens to men, and if it happens to men, it's because they want big muscles, and like there was just no way to translate. And I remember going to my counselor the first time and saying, okay, look, I'm not anorexic, I don't want to be skinny, that's not my thing, I want to be lean and I want to cut weight for grappling. And that case study doesn't appear anywhere in the literature, or at least it didn't at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so, as you say, when you work with clients and you understand their realities, that is what's happening, right? Like that is such a gift to apprehend the full complexity of reality and to say, like the research doesn't even acknowledge this. And I mean, that's a constraint of research too, right? I mean, researchers research the people and things that they have access to. And so a lot of that is university students because they're cheap and they're available. And a lot of it is who you see in your own life world. So if all I see are 16-year-old gymnasts, that's who I'm going to study, right? And so I'm going to ignore everybody else. And so it's a very important point. And this is why I go back to this idea of experience. Like when a client is sitting in front of you and they violate all of your rules that you learned, you can either insist that they follow the rules, or you can just say, maybe we don't know much about this yet, and go with it.
Yeah. And just even thinking about the literature and a lot of the focus with either eating disorders or disordered eating, like this, if someone is like thin and emaciated, it's like an eating disorder, and if someone is like a lot heavier, it's like they're doing something good because they're on a diet. And I think there's some real like just not a good way of looking at things depending on what someone's size is when they're determining like how disorder is someone's thoughts around food.
Yeah, that's a really key point. I mean, there are plenty of there's all shapes and sizes of people with disordered eating. You know, there really, really is all shapes and sizes, all ages, all backgrounds. You know, it can be anyone, and there are physiological reasons for that, and psychological and cultural reasons, and you know, I mean, it's all kind of a big stew of stuff. But I would definitely say that, to bring this back around to coaching, that being in the fitness industry or the nutrition industry or being in athletics is definitely a risk factor, because you're just kind of marinating in it all the time, and you're around people who are thinking about exercise and thinking about nutrition, and so you can sometimes lose the context of like how important this is. You know, like in the pie chart of your life, exercise and nutrition takes a much bigger wedge than it should. It becomes your hobby, or it becomes like the main focus of your life. And I'm always a little bit wary of people who say, I'm very passionate about health and fitness. And on the one hand, it's great to be passionate about things, right? Passion is a great part of life. At the same time, I'm always wondering, how big of the pie chart of your life are these things, and are they the correct proportion in your life?
Just because, and I think you said this before, and it's something I've definitely said, like those things should be stepping stones for you to then do the other things in your life, as opposed to being your whole life.
Yes. I mean, nutrition is not the end point, right? I help you get in shape so that you can go out and do something else cool with your life, or so that you don't die prematurely from some chronic disease. You know, I mean, that's the point of, I always tell when I teach my grappling students, I'm always like, okay, no one is winning the warm up, right? This is not a competitive warm up. No one is winning anything here. The point of this is to get somewhere else. So don't mistake the path for the goal.
And so going through like what you did with disordered eating, and then that like opening up your eyes around that stuff, how much has that changed like maybe your thoughts on the focus in health and fitness around like aesthetics, and maybe like your thoughts on the whole body positive movement and how you see that sitting alongside health?
Well, that's a huge question too, right? And it's a good one, because I think that sometimes people set up a binary opposition where they say, like, either it's aesthetics or it's nothing at all, right? Yeah. Or if you say, like, look, I don't necessarily feel like, you know, extreme leanness is a great thing for anyone to aspire to as a permanent state of affairs. People will say, oh, are you saying that we should all just walk around and be, you know, 900 pounds? Well, you know, there's room to play in the middle, right? And I do have some concerns about the body positive movement, in the sense that I don't always feel like their grasp of physiology is super strong, because some people fall into that trap of saying, well, you know, any size is great, any body is great, any level of whatever is great. And I'm like, well, you know, really it's more about finding an optimal range to be in that gives you the best chance, the best set of potential, the best mobility, the best function, the best health, the best, you know, like kind of sits at the nexus of all the optimization that you might want in your life. And it's a range, and it's a bigger range than people think. Yeah. But I think, you know, physiological facts, unfortunately, don't really care what we want. And so we know that outside a particular range, whether that's under or over, we do see health consequences. And so, you know, if your goal is to walk around at 5% body fat all the time, not a good goal. If you're walking around at 50% body fat all the time, probably not a good thing either. And this has to do with things like mechanical loading on the structure, about the chemical effects of fat tissue, about the hormonal effects, you know, the systemic effects. So I kind of want to take this middle ground of saying, look, you are who you are. There's incredible diversity in human beings. And so where your optimal range is may not be someone else's optimal range. But ideally, we want to balance all of these criteria: function, health, mobility, quality of life, all this stuff, and just find that happy place for you.
Yeah. And look, I would say like a couple of things on that is, the focus then again has to go back to healthy habits, as opposed to we need to get the weight off by whatever means, which I think unfortunately is often too much the message. the other side of that is often let's try and shame people into this, into like getting them to make changes, which also typically backfires. But I also think that some of the body positive has a good thing in terms of looking at mental and emotional health as opposed to just the physical health. So those would be the things that I would add on to what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's another angle here, which is, well, maybe there's two other angles, which is one of aging.
Yeah.
Aging changes the game hugely. And so like what your optimal state of affairs is when you're 18 is not what it is when you're 38 or 58 or 68, right? And so, or 88 or 108, right? So, we have to, like, our idea of where we want to be will change, and that's a good thing, and that's a normal thing. The other angle is ability, right? Like, not everyone gets the same kind of starting line, baseline of function. And so people, most of us are sort of temporarily able-bodied, and there's chronic illness, there's injury, there's, significant movement limitations. There's all kinds of things that can happen to a person that, play into the idea of what is a good body, quote unquote. So, and I do think the disability piece is really key, because many people feel like, oh, if I have an activity limitation, or if I have a chronic illness, or if I'm not a peak performer in some way, that also means I have a bad body. Well, no, it doesn't, right? Like, if you're alive, you have a good body. Your body is doing something right if you're alive. And so I also feel like I want to expand that idea of body positivity to say, this isn't just about looks, as you say. It's about state of mind. It's about relationships. I mean, there's a whole kind of social piece to this too, right? Your embeddedness within a social network. Yeah. It's about quality of life, and it's about being able to fulfill whatever capacity you have in the best way that you can, whatever that looks like for you today. And so, that's kind of how I come down on it. And so I think that the time to change is when you can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, let's say that your lack of fitness is inhibiting you from doing things that are meaningful to you. Okay, that's when you want to make changes, right? If I remember when I was quite heavy, like, it actually, I was in a lot of pain. First of all, a lot of things hurt, but it kept me from doing stuff. And to me, that was like, okay, you know what? There are things I want to do, and now I'm having trouble doing. And so I would like to be able to do those things. And so I would like to change my body in order to accomplish something else. But that being said, I could probably do those things without being 18% body fat. In fact, I know I can, because I do them now.
Yeah.
And like I said, and as you age, things change as well. And so the bar moves there too. But so I think, body positivity is interesting, because I think we always want to have a fundamental attitude of compassion and care for our clients, and really recognize the intrinsic worth of people, and then help them get where they want to go. At the same time, I think it's also helpful to tell people about physiological realities. So if you're a certain weight or size or body fat, you will see particular effects, and it's up to you to decide how you want to go on that, and how, as the coach, I could help you make positive and sane changes that would help you change if you wanted to.
Okay. And kind of on this tip as well, you wrote a great article for Precision Nutrition called I Want to Be That Girl, which I absolutely love. Do you want to describe a little bit about this for anyone who hasn't seen it? Because I'd really like to chat about that.
Yeah, we actually wrote sort of these companion pieces. There was that girl and that guy. And so the idea is basically that a lot of us have this image in our heads of the person that we want to be. And it was interesting because we did a lot of research with our clients, and the guys all told us, I want to be that guy on the cover of the magazine, which is kind of funny. Like, you wouldn't think that men would necessarily have that idealization, but they did, which was interesting. And the guy on the cover of the magazine for the men really symbolized not just looks, but also the guy who kind of had his whole life together, right? And that girl is the same, right? So that girl or that guy is the person who not only looks amazing and is in super great shape, but they have everything together. Their whole life is just great. They're getting, tons of attention from whatever gender they prefer. Their life is all in order. Their house looks terrific, whatever, right? And so we all walk around with this idea of this person in our head. And so a lot of our fitness efforts are geared at somehow moving towards that ideal. And so the article was sort of about, first of all, that girl is not really that girl, and that guy is really not that guy. And so there's, it's a facade, right? Like the person that you see on the cover of a magazine has been saran wrapped and dehydrated and starved and airbrushed and tanned and painted and whatever and surgeried to look like that. So that girl or that guy isn't even that girl or that guy. It's not like they get out of bed and are just amazing, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's a cost to them as well. Like there's a cost to kind of have that moment of glory. So that's sort of the first piece. And the other piece is like, look, that's a no-win kind of game to try and be that girl or that guy. What you really want to be looking for is to be the best version of yourself, and really have realistic ideas. And everyone hates the word realistic because it's kind of a grown-up word and it sucks. We don't want to be realistic, but what research tells us is that, in fact, if you have realistic role models, you're vastly more likely to stick to a plan. My realistic role model is my grandmother, who's just about to turn 90 years old. She lives by herself in a little cabin in northern Canada, has a garden and walks around with her wheelbarrow and whatever. Like, she's just physically active. And that's a realistic role model. And I look at her and I'm like, yeah, that's inspiring. But if I look at a magazine cover, I'm like, it's like trying to be a badger. Like, it just has no relevance to me in my life, right? So people who have realistic role models are much better able to pursue these fitness and nutrition goals. It seems a little bit counterintuitive, but that's just how it seems to work.
No, there was a great article saying a very similar thing on, I don't know if you know James Clear, James Clear's blog,
yes.
And looking at like Steve, he started off looking at Steve Martin's career and how he just like slowly plugged away at it for like 15 years or something like that before he really hit the big time. But looking at this idea of like the Goldilocks idea of motivation, like you don't want something to be so easy because then you get bored. You don't want something to be so difficult because then it like just, you're like, I can't do this, it's too hard. But if you have those little gradual things, people will still keep chugging away at it. And it's then over time that you then make massive changes. But if the goal is to make those massive changes from day one, and that's like your incentive, that incentive doesn't work so well.
Yeah, and I talked to John Berardi about this, and I was saying that like what we really want to be at Precision Nutrition is not superstars. Like, we don't want to present ourselves, because I mean, first of all, it wouldn't be accurate, but even if we were to imagine it, we wouldn't want to present ourselves as quote unquote superstars. Really, the figure of John Berardi as a kind of an icon he's more like your cooler older brother, like he can grow a mustache and he has a car and he has a girlfriend or whatever, right? Like, so, but it's like that one step away from you aspirational, right? So you come to Precision Nutrition, you're like, these people seem to have a little more together than I do, but not so much that it feels ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it's like my big sister, big brother, and I can look up to them and know I could get to where you are someday, and it doesn't seem out of reach. And I'm not there right now, but over time, like, you'll let me ride in your car and you'll show me how to shave. And in fact, we just put out an article which I really love. It's sort of this postcards from the future idea, and so we have pictures from clients who've just graduated from our coaching program of what they are right now, and saying to people, hey, like, this is where I'm at right now. I never could have thought that I would be able to do this. This is me on a ski trip. This is me sparring with my little son in martial arts. This is me running my first triathlon. And, a year ago, I weighed this much, or I was this much out of shape, or I had a knee injury or whatever. I never thought that I could do it. And to me, that's just terrific. It's like a year from now, that's the perfect amount of time to imagine and use as a role model, for example. So it's like our the way we pitch ourselves is like, yeah, older brother, sister, just like a tiny bit more together, but completely achievable.
Yeah, which then is counterintuitive, but is way more motivating than saying like, we're the best of the best, look how ripped we are, like, you can too.
Yeah. I mean, and who wants to be like, who, like maybe 1% of clients is inspired by that. But honestly, like, regular people with jobs and families are like, again, it might as well be a badger or a space alien when you see those kinds of people, because you're like, this has nothing to do with my life. I don't know anyone who looks like that. Like, it's an imaginary kind of thing that just really has no connection to me and anyone I know.
Yeah. I think that becomes even more the case as people get older, have kids, have family. Like, when you're in your very early 20s, like, maybe it feels like more of a realistic goal to be aiming towards that. But as more of life gets piled on top of you, you realize, you know what, I would have to give up so much that I just it's not worth it.
Yes. And I've been thinking recently too, that sanity is such a beautiful, underrated goal. Like, I just want to have a sane, happy life. Like, that's actually surprisingly difficult. So I think that's a very underrated sort of thing to want.
No, definitely. And I think a lot of the time, because the clients I work with, it really varies, but I do work a lot with disordered eating or people who've come from quite messed up relationships with food. And their end goal is just that it's been great. I've just started cooking for myself and I'm really enjoying that process. And there's just this level of, as you said, like achieving sanity and that being just so wonderful.
Yeah. It's like I went and had a sandwich and it was just a sandwich. It's almost like the Zen thing, right? Yeah. Like, once you've achieved enlightenment, the sandwich is just a sandwich again.
Yeah. Which is perfect. And it's where a lot of people need to get to, because as you said before, like so much of the disordered eating has become much more commonplace than a lot of people think.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue, perhaps unpopularly, that a lot of adherence to particular dietary bandwagons is a socially acceptable way to have disordered eating. So, so it can be guised as, well, I'm concerned about my health, or I'm concerned about this or that, or, the quality of what I eat or whatever. And all these sound like really good. Like, oh yeah, it's good to be concerned about the quality of what you eat. That seems very sensible, right? Yep. But I think a lot of these are just socially convenient ways to go further into disordered eating, and have it be okay and have it make sense in a way. Because, if you step back by the definition of disordered eating, for a lot of these people, you're like, oh, actually, your progression into this dietary plan is not bringing you closer to sanity and wellness and health and, just being mentally balanced, right? So I do feel concerned when I see people's Instagram feeds full of stuff and people taking pictures of their meals and like posting their confessionals too, like, oh, I just ate all this, but tomorrow it's back to the gym. And I'm like, oh, I don't feel good about this, right? Yeah. But it's such a socially acceptable thing. It's really hard to sort of say, like, where is the line between normal, sane, healthy eating and disorder.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think a good litmus test is what happens when you don't follow the plan. Like, are you able to eat some food, or you just couldn't possibly eat stuff that are off your plan? Or if you do eat something that's off your plan, what happens to you, like, mentally, emotionally? And if you can be okay with that and be like, you know what, this is life, it happens, then I think what you're doing is probably okay. Like, you're adhering to a dietary practice that probably works for you. But if there's this whole mental emotional episode because you haven't followed through on something, and something that is so insignificant in the whole scheme of things, then I think you're in a pretty dangerous territory.
Yes, and I also would say that if your dietary plan has periods to it, and what I mean by that, I've seen examples where gyms or whatever groups will have a dietary challenge, and so everyone kind of agrees to stick to a certain thing for a while. But then at the end, there's like a big blowout, and so there was this one. I hate to pin it on CrossFit. It's not a CrossFit thing, but it was a CrossFit gym locally, and they had like a 30-day paleo challenge. But on day 31, they had a big party where everyone got to eat all the stuff that they weren't allowed to eat for those 30 days. And I was like, I don't think this is getting us closer to where we want to be.
Like, if there's that much of a bounce back from what you were doing before, and it feels like you will need to unleash, then it says a lot about how sustainable what you're promoting really is.
Yes, yes. And one of my clients has a really great term for that. He calls it the victory lap. So whatever you do, like after you've completed the really difficult task, you just go and you unsnap the leash and you just go hog wild. So if there's ever a victory lap, you might want to ask questions about yourself.
Right. Well, look, Krista, this has been fantastic. I really love chatting with you, but I need to wrap this up. But look, before I go, where can people go to find out more information about you? And look, I'll put everything in the show notes so you can just tell them whatever the links are for your web or social media or anything, or even if you've got upcoming events or books or anything that you want to promote, I can then put it all in the show notes as well.
Well, that's great. Yeah, the two easiest places to find me, stumptuous.com. So that's stumptuous.com. And then precisionnutrition.com. And of course, I'm on the Facebook, so you can find me at Krista Scott-Dixon there. I'm active there. So those are the best places to find me, I would say. And nothing exciting coming up just yet, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. There's always something coming down the pipe, and we've been doing a lot more speaking gigs and whatnot for precision nutrition. So hopefully, in the future, I'll keep people posted about where we might turn up.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really love your blog. I love everything that Precision Nutrition is doing, and all the stuff that you've shared today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.